Hello, we would like to welcome all of you to the FDA virtual press conference today to discuss the authorization of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine in adolescents aged 12 through 15. We are joined this afternoon by Dr. Janet Woodcock, Acting FDA Commissioner, and Dr. Peter Marks, Director of the FDA Center for Biologics Evaluation and Research. First, we will hear remarks from Dr. Woodcock and then Dr. Marks. Following their remarks, we will open up for questions. With that, let's turn over the press conference to Dr. Woodcock.
Thanks, Allison, and thanks to all of you for joining. It's really great to be in the company of America's future journalists. You've got quite a job cut out for you. Now, last week, the FDA announced it had authorized the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine for emergency use for the prevention of COVID-19 to include people down to 12 years of age. After the FDA's action, there was another important step in the process. The CDC's Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices met to discuss the use of this vaccine and overwhelmingly voted in favor of recommending its use in all teens 12 through 15 years old. Of course, it had already been authorized for older people. Taken together, the public can have faith that the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine for 12 to 15-year-olds meets FDA's high standards for safety and effectiveness. And since the FDA and CDC's actions, over 600,000 adolescents aged 12 to 15 years have received their first shot of the vaccine. That's pretty amazing. We know this action is a big step for our country. Vaccinating a younger population brings us closer to returning to a sense of normalcy and to ending the pandemic, something we all have been looking forward to. Parents, guardians, and adolescents can rest assured that in making its decision, FDA conducted a rigorous and thorough review of all available scientific data, as we have with all our COVID-19 vaccine authorizations. Dr. Marks will elaborate a bit more on how the FDA reviews vaccines. I would like to stress that adolescents, parents, and communities can have full confidence in our processes for reviewing this vaccine. The FDA has done everything we can to assure that the COVID-19 vaccines we've authorized have met our high standards for quality, safety, and effectiveness. We know that every time someone, including members of our own family, receives a COVID-19 vaccine, they're putting their trust in us. We're humbled by this trust, and we're working hard every single day to maintain that trust. As families consider the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccines for their kids, we recognize that many have questions about what the FDA's processes are, whether this vaccine is safe, and so forth. Similar to our vaccine authorizations for adults, we've posted a number of documents regarding how we reached a decision, frequently asked questions, and fact sheets for healthcare providers, vaccine recipients, and their caregivers. This level of transparency should help instill confidence in both parents who decide to have their children vaccinated, as well as by the kids themselves. Getting more of our population vaccinated is critical to moving forward and past this pandemic. While younger people generally have milder symptoms from COVID-19, kids are not immune to this virus. Through April 2021, approximately 1.5 million children 11 through 17 years old were diagnosed with COVID-19. Reopening our schools and communities is the top of minds of many parents and kids, and getting our children vaccinated to prevent the disease will help our children and families get back to a more normal routine. If you're now eligible for COVID-19 vaccine, I encourage you to talk to your parents about getting your vaccine and talk to your friends about getting theirs. Thank you. And now I'll turn it over to Dr. Marks.
Thank you, Dr. Woodcock. It's wonderful to be joined by so many young leaders today. First, I want to reiterate Dr. Woodcock's sentiment that this important step the FDA has taken was guided by science. Having a vaccine authorized for a younger population is a critical step in continuing to lessen the immense public health burden caused by the COVID-19 pandemic and helping us all to return to more normal daily life. I'd like to share a little bit more about the FDA's review process for this vaccine, which, as Dr. Woodcock noted, it's outlined in many documents that we have available on the FDA's website. To determine the safety of the vaccine, the FDA looked at results from a clinical trial of more than 2,000 people who were 12 through 15 years old. Half of the participants received the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine, and half received a placebo made of saline or salt water. For those who don't know, a placebo like saline is used by researchers during studies of drugs or biologics to help them understand what effect a new drug or some other treatment might have on a particular condition. Some groups will be tested using the real drug, and others will only get the placebo so researchers can tell how well the drug being tested works. In order to determine if the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine was safe, more than half of the participants in the clinical trial were followed for safety for at least 2 months after they received the second dose of the vaccine. And the side effects seen in those ages 12 through 15 were similar to those experienced by people 16 and older who received the vaccine in earlier clinical trials. While some people experience side effects following any vaccination, everyone's experience isn't the same, and some might not experience any side effects at all. As part of the authorization, the Pfizer-BioNTech is required to continue to collect data about the clinical trial participants and other vaccinated people so we can quickly identify any potential safety issues. Now, to evaluate the vaccine's effectiveness or how well the vaccine works, the FDA looked at data that was submitted about how participants' immune systems responded to the vaccine. The agency looked at the data from 190 vaccinated 12 through 15-year-olds and compared that to information on the immune response of 170 individuals who were 16 through 25 years old. And the data added to the clinical trial data that the agency reviewed when authorizing the vaccine and showed that the response was excellent in the 12 to 15-year-old group. We now have enough data in this age and as well as the real world information we have following the administration of more than 145 million doses of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine across the country to adults to make us able to determine that we could update the emergency use authorization for this vaccine to allow it to be administered to individuals 12 through 15 years old. Now, you may be wondering about how this vaccine will be different from the COVID-19 vaccine that your parents, family members, and teachers may have received. There's no difference in the way the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine will be administered to 12 through 15-year-olds. It's given as the series of 2 doses, 3 weeks apart, using the same dose that's given to those 16 years of age and older. And FDA will continue to work diligently to protect the health and safety of Americans of all ages, and we're committed to making decisions that are guided by science that people can trust. We know that working together, we can overcome the challenge of COVID-19. I'd like to now turn the press conference back over to the moderator.
Thank you, Dr. Woodcock and Dr. Marks. At this time, we're going to open the question and answer portion of the press conference. As a reminder, please raise your hand if you have a question. When you're called on, please unmute and turn on your camera. We're going to give a couple minutes to see if we get our first question. Our first question comes from Austin McClellan.
Hi. So across the U.S. in many schools, in many different areas, many students would like to get vaccines, but sometimes their parents will not allow them to get vaccines. So what would you recommend that they do? Or would you give any advice?
Well, perhaps you could have your parents talk to your pediatrician or your family doctor about the vaccines and make sure that that has straightened out any misconceptions they might have about the vaccines, I think that would probably be the best first step for you, for anyone who has that issue. Peter?
I agree completely. I think it's a matter of if they have concerns, it's worthwhile asking them if they can get them answered.
Our next question comes from Alexander Steele.
All right, my name is Alex Stile. Thank you for both Dr. Woodcock and Dr. Marks for having all the student journalists here. This is going to be a great opportunity for everyone. So in your professional opinions, should students who have received both doses of the vaccine and have waited their 2 weeks afterwards be allowed the privilege to demask in school settings, assuming that they would follow that guidance ethically and morally?
Again, I think that masking rules and procedures are going to be up to the local jurisdictions. And the reason for that might be how much virus is circulating around in the community, what kind of virus, also how many people generally have been vaccinated in that community. As we just heard, there's a lot of variability there. We think that response to this vaccine was very robust in the children who received it, and it seemed to protect them very well, all right? But we don't know for a large variety of people. And there are individuals, for example, who maybe have immunocompromised or some other condition who may not react so well. So I think each jurisdiction will probably look to the CDC guidance, to what their state is saying and what their local community, what the prevalence of the virus is circulating around, what kind of variants are circulating, and they'll put all that together. So it'd be probably best advice is to follow the local authorities. Dr. Marks, any thoughts?
I agree with you completely.
Okay.
Our next question comes from Zoe.
Hi.
Hey.
So according to the CDC, after mid-March, hospitalization rates increased in all pediatric age groups. So why was the EUA only issued for 12 to 15-year-olds? And if it was for a lack of testing, why weren't all of these age groups able to be tested?
This is actually a very technical issue. I'll turn it over to Dr. Marks because it relates to how you actually develop these type of products.
Right, it's a great question. So the easiest group to test were 12 to 15-year-olds because it was very easy to bridge down, essentially bootstrap our way down to the 12 to 15-year-olds because we knew you could use the same dose of vaccine that's used in older individuals. And so they were able to be enrolled in trials very early on. When you get to younger children, we have to use reduced doses of the vaccine. So first you have to figure out what dose you're going to use, and then you have to test in the children. And the other issue is that in younger children, particularly in children younger than 10 years of age, there's been a syndrome that's been seen rarely when they've gotten COVID-19, where they get an inflammatory disorder called multisystem inflammatory syndrome. Now, we don't know that the vaccine would cause anything like that, but we have to make sure that we follow the younger children a bit longer. So as much as we'd like to move down to that population as quickly as possible, it took a little longer to get those studies started. And younger children are being studied as we speak with different vaccines. And those data will probably come in later this year. But for right now, we're very grateful that we can at least get junior high and high school students vaccinated because that's an important part of the population to be able to get back on track.
Yes, and I would add that it's easy to forget because these development programs have been so successful that, generally speaking, a vaccine development program, I'm being conservative, Peter, it might take 7 years in the clinic. 7 years of testing, right? And they work their way slowly down from normal volunteers, and they're very careful at every step. And we've been very careful. However, you can only compress this so much. And basically, I agree. I'm a rheumatologist, and we deal with odd autoimmune disorders and everything. And I agree, we have to be careful as we step down into younger children, because they appear to have a different immune response when they get infected with this virus.
Our next question comes from Brennan.
Hello. So I have been hearing reports that likely the Moderna vaccine will need a booster shot, with the Pfizer vaccine likely need a booster shot for the variants of concern that are possibly rising in the United States. And could this maybe be included in the seasonal flu shot?
Good questions, and we're asking ourselves the same questions. As far as the seasonal flu shot, we have to study that. So we hope that studies will happen quickly when the seasonal flu shot becomes available, because it's seasonal, and so it's not available all the time, right? And as far as boosters, that, the sort of the canary in the coal mine, so to speak, if you understand such a dated metaphor, would be our very older population who got the vaccine first. We need to look at how their immunity is waning, and are they starting to get infected at some point, or is their immunity dropping down to a level where they might not be able to fight against the virus. They were the people, if you recall, who were immunized first, so we have the longest follow-up on them. As far as variants go, we're just going to have to determine that currently the immune response to these vaccines is being tested against all the variants to see how strong it is against each of the variants. And we just hope a variant doesn't arise that can elude our vaccines. So, Dr. Marks?
Yeah, I think you've captured it very nicely. Right now, the good news is that for the current generation of vaccines, both for Pfizer and Moderna, the immune responses are so good that they appear to get all of the variants that are currently moving around in the United States. So hopefully, it would be nice if it'll turn out that it'll be a year before anyone might need a booster, but we still don't know. It could be more, could be a little less, but that's what, this is just something we're going to have to figure out as we go.
Our next question comes from Ava.
Hello, my name is Eva Pate. I have a question about Pfizer and their history of fraud. I'm going to read something, if you don't mind. It says, Pharmaceutical company has agreed to plead guilty to a felony violation of the FDA for misbranding Bexdura with the intent of defraud or misleading. In addition to this, they also illegally promoted 4 drugs: Bexdura, Gordon, an antipsychotic drugs, Zexton, an antibiotic, along with a few others. So how can you trust the efficiency of such a vaccine when this company has lied in the past?
Do you want me to take that first, Peter?
I'm happy to start with that
Okay.
one. So, companies do things that are sometimes not good. Our job as regulators is to make sure that we have methods in place to make sure that the right thing happens.
Yes.
Our center has been regulating vaccines since 1903. So we've seen everything. And that means we do a number of things to make sure that things check out. That includes going and looking at the data that's submitted to us, the clinical trial data, and that includes making sure that the actual test results match up with what's submitted to us. It all includes going to the factories where these vaccines are made and making sure that they are being made with high quality. And that it includes reviewing all of that information to make sure it makes sense and gets put together. And then as a check on that, we have something called post-market surveillance, where after the vaccine is out there in the real world, we're able to look and make sure that it remains safe and that it remains effective. And so let's just specifically for the Pfizer vaccine for COVID-19, we can say that we checked out all of the data. We don't check out every last piece, but we generally check out somewhere on the order of 10% to up to 20% of the data in a clinical trial. And that checked out. The manufacturing process checked out. And so that trial in about close to 44,000 people almost, things checked out there. But what we now also have are data from very large studies conducted, for instance, in Israel and 5 million people using the Pfizer vaccine that seem to show that what was seen in the clinical trial is happening in real life in those countries. So when the totality of the evidence, when everything comes together to look right like that, we feel reasonably confident that things are working. That means we're still going to be vigilant. And I'm not saying that they weren't wrong at some point. What I'm just saying is that our job is in front of it as an FDA is to make sure that for these tremendously important public health products, that people can trust them. Dr. Woodcock, anything else?
No, I agree. I mean, that was probably those violations and prosecutions you cited, Ava, were probably from the drug center when I was head of it. We prosecuted quite a few companies for what we considered improper advertising practices over the years. So that doesn't mean necessarily that their medicines that were developed by their scientists were bad. It means that when they were commercially marketing them, they did improper marketing activities, and we go after those people. The pharmaceutical market is very competitive, and people, there has been a lot of improper advertising and so forth. So, but on the scientific side, we have very rigorous systems, as Peter said, to prevent any kind of fraud or anything like that from getting through the system. It's a little harder for us to police all the different detail people and everything are out there promoting to doctors, but we do it also.
Our final question comes from Nathan.
Hi, thank you very much. My question is, while these COVID vaccines are being made free to the general public, what is the estimated cost for them that the U.S. is paying, and what is the long-term plan for the United States to pay for them?
Great question. I'm gonna try to start with this one because I know a little bit of the background. So as part of the initial investment that the government put into these vaccines, there was about I believe it was close to $18 billion spread around in vaccine development to ensure that we had vaccines to distribute to people free of any cost of the vaccine. Now, eventually, at some point, these vaccines will move from being emergency use authorized vaccines, which is a special pathway to make them available, to being conventional licensed vaccines. And this public health emergency may be over. At that point, it may be that these will be paid for by the traditional insurance methods that people's insurance pay for them. In the meantime, it is also, I think, part of your question, and I inferred from what you said, is that the United States government is probably going to help out other countries by making large amounts or paying for large amounts of vaccine to be made and given away, because I think the government understands that unless, as many governments around the world understand, that unless we all bring this infectious disease under control, it's going to continue to create problems because so many people go from place to place that you can't just wall off your country. So it is a lot of money that's been spent on this. But when you think about the loss of life, the loss of livelihood, and what it actually cost in terms of the amount to the economy, for instance, it was the shutdowns a year ago were estimated to be $1 trillion worth of cost to the economy. The cost of making the vaccine is actually quite small, despite the fact that it's a very large number.
Right. Yes, and what was so surprising is that we were so lucky that typical pharmaceuticals, not necessarily vaccines, maybe only 1 out of 10 that get into people and are tested are actually safe enough and work well enough to actually get approved and onto, or EUA in this case. So we were very lucky that we got some vaccines that had really startling effectiveness. I think everyone was surprised at how well that turned out.
I just have to pick up on that because it's something that really we shouldn't let go. The fact that this particular vaccine for 12 to 15-year-olds, the Pfizer vaccine, basically had in the trial that in the 2,200 adolescents, 12 to 15-year-olds, the 1,005 who got the vaccine, none of them got COVID-19, whereas 16 of 978 adolescents aged 12 to 15 who got the placebo, the saline, got COVID-19. So that means you had what is essentially calculates out to 100% effectiveness there. We don't see that very often with vaccines. There are a few vaccines that are really, really good. For instance, the vaccine that you probably got or that we all probably got for measles, mumps, and rubella, that's pretty good. It's not actually 100%, but it's pretty close. Particularly for measles. But to get so lucky to have this type of highly effective vaccine, we're very grateful that was very good luck.
Yeah, and my point was it's worth the investment. The government invested in a lot more of the candidates because it was most likely that only one would make it through or something like that. So the fact that we already have 3 with an emergency use authorization and they're highly effective is terrific.
This concludes today's press conference. Thank you so much for joining us and asking your important questions. A replay will be available on FDA's YouTube page if you have further questions. Please send an email to fdaoma@fda.hhs.gov. Thank you and have a great day.